Hey there, how are you? And today we're going to go over the Druid class tree and the Guardian talent tree to go over which talent points to pick in which scenarios. So, straight off the bat, let's hop into the Guardian talent tree. At the very top, we have the choices between Improved SI, Ursoc's Endurance, and Innate Resolve. And before I get into this, I just want to say this is primarily for the Incarn build. If you guys are talking about no Incarn build, then that is not the video for this. This is primarily just talking about the Incarn build. Um, Improved SI is not something you would normally take, if ever. This is a point where you only take for specific scenarios, or maybe you're new to Guardian tanking and you just don't know, um, or you're just new to tanking in general, actually, and you don't know what's gonna hit you hard, so you kind of have these improved SI charges, panic buttons that you can use. And I mean, like, you are new to tanking and that you're not keeping up your Iron First stack somehow. Um, Not recognizing any kind of tank busters whatsoever, things like that. But aside from those scenarios, you will almost never need improved SI. Now, between Innate Resolve and Ursoc's Endurance, Innate Resolve is an extra charge of Frenzy Regen, which I think will be useful for 90% Guardian players outside of Incarn. The extra Frenzied Regen definitely helps that sustain for about 30 to 40 seconds where you do not have Incarn. Ursoc's Endurance is, for the most part, more damage on Thorns of Iron. It essentially equates to 4 extra stacks of Iron Fur because Iron Fur is on a 0.5 second cooldown. The 2 additional seconds of Bark Skin does help a bit, but I think the only real scenarios where it will help a lot are on certain boss fights where it will last for two full events. By events I mean kind of tank hits, tank hits that are like spells. So an example is on Halls of Infusion. I think it's Kajin. I forgot the name of the boss. The boss does a Frost Shock, and that Frost Shock, I believe with Ursoc's Endurance, you will be able to have Bark Skin for both Frost Shocks. You might be able to have it even without it. Don't exactly remember, but that is an example. Alright, so hopping down to the middle part of the tree, I do think survival of the fittest is just kind of mandatory in all scenarios. The decisions are between Reinforced Fur, Tooth and Claw, and Earth Warden. Now, you do need to have Tooth and Claw or Earth Warden in order to get to Unchecked Aggression, which allows you to get down to the Circle of Life and Death and Blood Frenzy talents at the bottom of the tree. So, one of these is locked in. You can have 2, or one in these 2, and then one in Reinforced Fur. General rule of thumb is Earth Warden is something you will take if the melee hits are quite heavy, or there's just a ton of melee hits and they all do a decent amount of damage to where you are, I guess, sufficiently scared. Dungeons would include Freehold. Freehold mobs do melee quite hard. Vortex Pinnacle. There are a few mobs in there that are quite terrifying and they do hurt quite a bit all in Fort Weeks. One of them is the Tornadoes. So let me see. These Gust Soldiers. So their Wind Flurry makes them attack very quickly. And Earth Warden definitely helps with this. Otherwise, you do need to be prepared for this with a defensive. They have this they have this up quite often. So you might not necessarily have enough defensives for it, which is where Earth Warden does come into play. But the other thing that hurts a lot are these Servants of Assad. They have this Sure Strike that is instant. There is no cast time on it. I do believe Earth Warden works on this. I cannot confirm yet. However, aside from that, I mean, these mobs still do a decent amount of melee hits. Nothing too scary though, but these Servant of Assad's Sure Strikes will absolutely destroy you, especially because there aren't that many mobs actually meleeing you. The Temple Adepts don't melee. And half the time these Servants of Assad's are charging to your teammates, so they're not really meleeing you either. In other words, you're usually stuck with like 2 stacks of Iron Fur, maybe 3, and that is probably not enough on a higher fort key to really feel safe. Because once again, the Sure Strike absolutely bangs. So that's where you would want the Earth Warden. Some of the other dungeons, Freehold, or not Freehold, Underrot, not really necessary in my opinion, but these Living Rots do melee quite heavy as you're gathering them up. Especially since everybody does big pulls in here. You definitely will feel the pain a bit, but I don't feel like you need Earth Warden in this dungeon. It's something you can take if you feel like you're taking too much damage. And then Neltharis, honestly, this dungeon is a bit of a weird one. There are a lot of melee hits, however, because of the dragon chains in here, it actually takes care of most of the melee hits, because most of them are in this left area. Well, most routes will have you kill all the trash in this left area, so not really something you necessarily need. And then Brackenhide is also a bit of a weird one. There are massive pulls after the first boss to where I would say you do want Earth Warden. Alright, for the next points, Tooth and Claw. This is something, as of right now, in 10.1, you are still going to be taking on Tyrant weeks. Usually on Tyrant weeks, timer is not too much of a factor. It's just whether you can kill the bosses. So on Tyrant weeks, you definitely will take Tooth and Claw, not only to help with single target damage, but also to help with damage reduction on tank busters. So this is something you definitely want to take. The other scenarios I wouldn't take it are on certain dungeons where there's always one mob that has higher health than others and you don't have very many funnel classes in your group. Your group is just straight spread blanket damage. And then the last one is Reinforced Fur. I think this is more of a well-balanced talent. You have extra Iron Fur stacks. You have extra Thorns of Iron damage, 15% extra, as well as 10% extra damage reduction on your bark skin. I think in most scenarios, you will most likely be running both Reinforced Fur and Tooth and Claw. I can see certain situations where you might drop Layered Mane Reinforced Fur or Tooth and Claw Vulnerable Flesh for Vicious Cycle Fear of Nature. Actually, you can't drop Tooth and Claw for Vicious Cycle Fear of Nature. It would just be Tooth and Claw, and you drop it for like Vicious Cycle, something like this. But in most situations, you're probably running Tooth and Claw with Reinforced Fur, and then you would be swapping out Reinforced Fur for Earth Warden or Tooth and Claw for Earth Warden. I guess the last point is, for Fear of Nature and Vicious Cycle, these are points where I'll take if I really feel like, oh, I'm super safe, I do not need any kind of defensives, I'll be absolutely okay. I'm just gonna opt for more damage. This would be on certain Tyran weeks where you know the bosses don't hurt, you know the trash doesn't hurt, so you can just drop this and just go more boss damage. I say boss damage because the trash damage doesn't matter. Obviously, this will help with trash damage as well, but this would primarily just be for helping out with single target boss damage. Now, at the bottom of the tree, you have very few options here. So, if you are playing Incarn, you 100% will have to have Ursock's Guidance as well as Blood Frenzy. This means you have Circle of Life and Death as well as Incarn locked in. And then the other points that are locked in are Twin Moonfire, Galactic Guardian. These two go hand in hand. They don't really work well one without the other. Thorns of Iron for 1 point is just too much damage. I don't think you can pass this up ever. And so your last point is the one where you can flex around. You can opt to go Rage of the Sleeper, or Loon's Favored. I don't believe the other points are really worth it in terms of damage or survivability. So Rage of the Sleeper I view as more of a defensive talent. Raise I view as more of a offensive talent. I know there is Raise plus Tooth and Claw. However, I would say it is not extremely viable in terms of surviving certain mechanics. So it's kind of dungeon dependent. And then you have a Loon's Favored, which I view as just straight damage. The healing portion of it is nice, but it is very rare that healing will actually save you. It would be nice only for dots primarily. So there are certain dungeons that have heavy dots, but few where, you know, even then it would actually save you. So as for my decisions, generally speaking, if there is some kind of magic tank buster, heavy tank busters that I am terrified of, I feel like I cannot live with just my Barkskin and SI. I will take Rage of the Sleeper to play it safe. Halls of Infusion and Neltharis are two of the dungeons. You have the Wardens that constantly do slashes, magic damage, as well as the Dragon Corridor in Halls of Infusion. Now, I do want to point out, those can be kited. You can range them. You can stop the Frost Bolts, or I think they're called Frost Bolts or Ice Bolts in Halls of Infusion. So, it all can be stopped. However, if you can't stop it, then I would recommend playing Rage of the Sleeper. Just play it safe. Raise is something I still will not run on Tyran weeks, because again, it does lower your maul damage, which will slow down your boss kill. There are plenty of scenarios where you have a DPS dead, you don't have battle res, so you know you guys slowly start to rot down. Say for example, Uldaman, the boss fight, Talandris, the snake boss, where people get the bleed. That boss is overtuned. You lose a DPS. You guys are, you know, at 20%, and then you guys are slowly whittling away. That extra boss damage will help. So don't just think, oh, my maul damage is, you know, 5% of my overall. It's not worth it to drop Raise. It doesn't always work like that. And then lastly, Loon's Favored. Kind of the same thing. On Tyran weeks, I will opt to go for Loon's Favored if I don't feel like I need Rage of the Sleeper. And then that way I have more boss damage. On Fort weeks, I will run Raise on most, not most dungeons, but I will definitely run Raise on quite a few dungeons where I feel like I just don't need Rage of the Sleeper to survive. There aren't many tank busters, it's all just melee hits, things like that. So those dungeons would include Brackenhide, not very many actually. Freehold, Underrot, the reason why I was debating Uldaman is because these crocodiles at the start absolutely destroy you with 3 stacks of bleed. And that is a very real situation where Rage of the Sleeper actually helps a lot. Because it gives you 25% leech, 25% DR. That is actually very, very useful when trying to survive these croc packs. But I mean, if you feel like you're okay dealing with these croc packs kind of solo, which could be the case, right? Then I think Raze is absolutely fine to take in this dungeon. Neltharis, once again, Wardens. There are some routes where you can skip the Wardens and or just do the Wardens when you have Incarn. But if you don't have those routes, then you will definitely want Rage of the Sleeper. And by those routes, I mean you want a Shroud. Nell Slayer is more of a low density dungeon. I don't think Raze will be very useful in this dungeon, unfortunately. There are some big pulls you can do in here, but few. Very few. Alright. That pretty much sums up the Guardian tree. Let's hop over to the class tree. So for the class tree, there are probably a few dungeons where you want to take Remove Corruption, so let's just straight up hop into it and go through them. Halls of Infusion, you definitely want the Poison Dispel for the frogs. Brackenhide Hollow, you will only take this if you are pulling these Gut Stabbers. These Gut Stabbers do put a poison on your teammates, and it does actually hurt a lot. Uldaman, kind of the same thing. If you don't have any Poison Dispel in your group at all, then you will probably have to take it for these Skittering Crawlers. Otherwise, you don't need it in here. Oh, actually, no, there's one more. There's the Curse Dudes. Give me a second. Warders. These dudes do cast Curse of Stone. However, if DPS are on top of it, you will usually never have to dispel this. But once again, if your group already has the spell, then you probably won't need to take it. Neltharis, you do need it for the last boss, so you do need to take it in this dungeon. Nell Slayer, you do not need to take it in this dungeon unless it is Tyrant Week and Raxus. Does hurt a lot. Not to you specifically, but to your DPS and healer. I usually do take it in this dungeon just to dispel my healer because this fight is a very intensive heal fight. If your healer dies and you know, during the poison, you guys are gonna fall behind very quickly. This is something I would recommend taking, but you don't need to if you feel like your healer is a god. Freehold, you do not need to take it. And Underrot, you will only need to take if you plan on Withering Curse going off, which could definitely be the case if you're pugging. So something to keep in mind. And Vortex Pinnacle, you do not need it. So for, you know, quite a few dungeons, you actually do need it, especially this week too, since it is Afflicted week. Now, the talents that I feel are locked in is everything on this left side all the way down to 1 point in Well-Honed Instincts. Incap Roar is just way too good of a CC ability, so I don't think you will ever be dropping this. The only situation that you might drop it is in Uldaman to stun Telondrus boss on the knockbacks. I would not recommend trying to do that for most people. Going down the right side, you definitely want to grab Nurturing Instincts into Typhoon. Typhoon is another ability, very nice for kiting as well as CCing. Now, you can drop this point as well as Ursul's Vortex to grab some of the things. Those things could be Heart of the Wild, improved Stampeding Roar. I know a lot of people have Wild Charge locked in, so I won't get too much into that, but say for example you do have that locked in, then this could be an example of your tree. Now, if you do not need the Dispel, the 3 extra points I would personally put it into is Vortex into Innervate, and I would actually take the point out of Heart of the Wild to put in Nature's Vigil. There are a lot of dungeons where there are rot fights, and because your group is rotting, you can help heal. Halls of Infusion, Kajin, again, a boss where there's plenty of rot damage. Your healers will definitely struggle. Nature's Vigil will certainly help with that, so that is something to consider. If you do want Heart of the Wild still, you can drop, again, Wild Charge for this. This is what I usually run whenever I don't need Dispel. And then when I do need Dispel, I again just drop these 3 points, and bam. There are some rare scenarios where, again, Halls of Infusion, where I will take both Remove Corruption and Nature's Vigil. The way I do this is I actually drop Improved SI, or not Improved SI, Improved Barkskin and Verdant Heart, and I'll put it here. This will mean a lot less, not a lot less, but it will mean less healing and less defensives. Be aware that you are doing this, and in that Dragon Corridor, you will want to range the Dragon Breath. I believe it's 15 yards, so you need to move 15 yards out. Alright, that pretty much sums up the entire video. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one.